Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're plunging into an official document. It's titled, Protecting Americans from Invasion Through Immigration Enforcement. Quite a title.
It definitely is. Sets a strong tone right away.
And our mission, really, just for you listening, is to unpack its key points. We want to understand the actions it actually directs agencies to take.
And critically, we're looking purely at the language and directives inside this document itself. No outside commentary, just what it says.
Exactly. So let's start at the beginning. Section 1 lays out the stated purpose, right?
It does. It claims the administration before this one oversaw, and this is their term, an unprecedented flood of illegal immigration.
Okay.
And according to the document, this costs taxpayers billions. It also posed threats, national security, public safety threats.
Like what specifically does it say?
Yeah, it lists things like crime, espionage, even terror-related activities. And it explicitly states the goal here is for the federal government to protect Americans by, faithfully executing immigration laws, prioritizing safety, security, and financial well-being.
Got it. So it frames the problem and the government's duty very specifically. And then Section 2, that gets into the actual policy.
Right to it. The stated policy is about executing immigration laws faithfully against everyone, anyone inadmissible or removable.
Everyone.
Everyone. But it does emphasize prioritizing those who might threaten safety or security.
And how does it describe the approach?
It uses pretty strong language. It talks about aiming for total and efficient enforcement, and it mentions using lawful incentives and detention capabilities to achieve that.
Okay, let's unpack that. How does the document actually plan to make this happen? Section 3 gets specific fast.
It really does. Right off the bat, it revokes 4 specific executive orders from early 2021.
Just wipes them off the books.
Essentially. And it's not just the orders themselves. It tells agencies to revoke any related policies, guidance, anything that came from those EOs.
Okay, so a clean slate in that sense.
And then it directs them to use all lawful means available to enforce immigration laws against, again, all inadmissible and removable individuals.
So it's saying roll back the old way and use the tools you already have, but use them fully.
That's the message. And building on that, it lays out some new stated priorities. Section 4 is about civil enforcement.
Civil, okay. What does that involve?
This section points to the Secretary of Homeland Security, DHS, overseeing agencies like ICE, CBP, USCIS.
Right.
It directs the Secretary to enable those agencies to set priorities focused on public safety and national security.
And what does that look like in practice?
Well, it includes a focus on enforcing final orders of removal, making sure they actually happen.
Okay.
There's a notable point here about ICE's Homeland Security Investigations Division, HSI.
What about HSI?
The document states its primary mission should be enforcing immigration laws, the INA, laws about illegal entry, unlawful presence, and basically furthering the goals of this order.
So that sounds like a potential shift, or at least a stated re-emphasis for HSI's focus back towards core immigration enforcement.
It certainly reads that way. And it's not just civil. Section 5 tackles criminal enforcement.
Okay, what's the directive there?
It tells the Attorney General, working with state and DHS, to prioritize prosecuting criminal offenses related to unauthorized entry or presence in the U.S.
Gotcha. Prosecution as a priority. Now, Section 6. This sounds like a big operational shift. Federal Homeland Security Task Forces, HSTFs.
Yeah, this is pretty significant. It mandates setting these up jointly by the AG and DHS in all states, nationwide.
Wow. Nationwide task forces. Who's supposed to be on them?
The document describes the mix. Federal agencies, definitely law enforcement, logistics, intel, operations people. But crucially, it also requires including relevant state and local law enforcement agencies. And it says federal agencies need to support these task forces.
So a real mix of federal, state, and local. What's their stated job? What's the mission?
According to the text, the objective is to, quote, end the presence of criminal cartels, foreign gangs, and transnational criminal organizations.
Big goals.
Very. It also directs them to dismantle smuggling and trafficking networks, and it puts a particular focus on crimes involving children.
Okay.
And it says they should use all law enforcement tools they have to enforce immigration laws. It even mentions providing a command center for coordination.
That feels like a serious attempt to integrate enforcement across different government levels.
Definitely seems designed that way.
Okay, moving on. Section 7 talks about identifying unregistered illegal aliens. What's the direction there?
This part tells DHS, state, and the AG to immediately publicize an existing legal requirement.
Which is?
That certain individuals who previously entered without authorization have to register with the government. It points to specific parts of the U.S. Code.
So it's an existing rule.
Yes, but the key here is the directive that follows. Agencies are told to treat failure to comply with these registration rules as a priority for both civil and criminal enforcement.
So highlighting an old rule and making enforcement a new priority.
Precisely. And Section 8 brings in the money aspect, civil fines and penalties.
What about them?
This directs DHS, working with Treasury, to make sure they actually assess and collect all the fines and penalties the law allows.
From who?
From individuals unlawfully present, including those who entered illegally, and also from anyone who facilitates their unlawful presence. It even asks for a progress report in 90 days.
Okay, tracking the money. Now let's talk about the removal process itself. Section 9 is about efficient removals.
Right. This section tells the DHS Secretary to use specific parts of the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA, that allow for expedited removal.
Expedited removal.
Yes. It mentions specific subsections and emphasizes using these tools, sometimes described with the phrase sole and unreviewable discretion, to quickly remove designated individuals.
So speed is key.
Speed seems to be a major focus. Beyond those specific tools, it directs prompt action using all other provisions of law to ensure, quote, efficient and expedited removal of individuals.
Leveraging existing laws for faster removals. What about detention? Section 10 addresses detention facilities.
It does. It directs DHS to act quickly, allocate resources, make contracts to build, operate, or use facilities to detain removable individuals.
So more detention capacity.
That's the aim. The order specifies this should be done to the extent permitted by law. The idea is to ensure people apprehended for immigration violations are detained while they wait for removal proceedings or actual removal.
Detention as a central part of the strategy outlined here. But what about encouraging people to leave on their own? Section 12 mentions voluntary compliance.
Yeah, it directs DHS, state, and the AG to implement policies and procedures using safeguards and bonds to encourage people unlawfully present to leave voluntarily and quickly.
How?
It specifically mentions increasing the use of voluntary departure provisions in the law, using international agreements, and other measures to encourage prompt departure. It even includes certain types of removals under this umbrella.
Okay, and what if other countries don't cooperate? Section 13 talks about recalcitrant countries.
This is about countries that refuse or delay taking back their citizens who are subject to removal from the U.S.
What does the order say to do?
It directs the Secretary of State and DHS Secretary to work together and effectively use sanctions that are already allowed under immigration law against those countries.
Sanctions?
Yes. It says diplomatic efforts should focus on getting countries to accept their nationals and remove roadblocks, like delays in verifying identity.
And delays matter.
Explicitly. Any failure or delay by a foreign country in verifying identity is supposed to be considered when deciding whether to apply these immigration sanctions or even other U.S. sanctions.
Putting pressure on other countries. Let's shift slightly. Section 11 goes back to federal-state agreements. This sounds like it connects to those task forces.
It definitely does. It's about expanding the enforcement footprint. This section directs DHS, where the law allows, and with state or local consent, to authorize state and local officers to perform some immigration functions.
Like what function?
Investigating, apprehending, detaining individuals inside the U.S. This is often done through what are known as 287G agreements. But importantly, it's under federal supervision. And the document clearly states this is in addition to the work federal officers do. It's supplemental.
So more boots on the ground, essentially, by deputizing state and local officers.
That seems to be the intent. It also allows for structuring these agreements for maximum effectiveness.
Okay. Then Section 17 takes aim at sanctuary jurisdictions. What does it direct agencies to do about places that, as the document puts it, interfere with federal enforcement?
This is a strong directive. It tells the AG and DHS Secretary, to the maximum extent the law allows, to evaluate and take legal actions.
What kind of actions?
To ensure jurisdictions that interfere with federal law enforcement, the text calls them sanctuary. Jurisdictions don't get federal funds, access to federal money.
Cutting off funding. Anything else?
It also directs them to evaluate and pursue any other lawful, criminal, or civil actions they deem appropriate based on practices that obstruct federal enforcement.
So, using financial and legal pressure. Section 16 seems broader. It addresses actions by the previous administration generally.
Yes, this directs state, AG, and DHS to quickly reverse prior policy decisions that, according to this document, led to an increased presence of unauthorized individuals.
Like overturn them.
Overturn them and make sure all their department's activities line up with the policies in this new order and with existing immigration laws.
Does it give any specific examples of policies to change?
It does, actually. It specifically calls out a few things.
Like
Ensuring parole authority, that's a way people can temporarily enter the U.S., is used only case by case for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit, sticking strictly to the statute.
Okay.
It also says temporary protected status, TPS, designations must be consistent with the law, limited in scope and duration.
And anything else?
And it directs them to ensure employment authorization follows the law and is not given to any unauthorized individuals.
Got it. So, specific policy areas targeted for reversal or tighter application. Let's turn to the money and resources side of things. Section 19 mandates a funding review. What's that about?
This tells the AG and DHS secretary to immediately review and audit, if necessary, all federal funding contracts, grants, agreements going to non-governmental organizations, NGOs.
Which NGOs?
Those that support or provide services directly or indirectly to removable or illegal individuals.
And what's the goal of the review?
To make sure these funding agreements follow the law, are free of waste, fraud, or abuse, and this seems key that they don't promote or facilitate violations of immigration laws.
That sounds potentially huge. What actions are supposed to follow this review?
The order directs them to pause funds while the review is ongoing.
Okay.
Then, terminate any agreements found to violate the law or involve waste fraud, prohibit similar future agreements, and even start clawback procedures to recoup funds if appropriate.
Wow. That's a directive with real teeth regarding how federal money flows to certain organizations.
It appears so. Then Section 20 talks about denial of public benefits.
What's the direction there?
This tells the director of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to make sure all government agencies identify and stop providing any public benefits to any individual not legally authorized to receive them under immigration law or other laws.
A government-wide check on benefits. And rounding this out, Section 21 calls for hiring more agents.
That's right, subject to funding being available, appropriations from Congress.
Right, always that caveat.
It directs DHS, specifically CBP and ICE, to take action to significantly boost the number of agents and officers they have for immigration duties.
More personnel. Okay, let's look at a couple more areas. Information sharing and victim support. Section 18 deals with information sharing.
This section directs DHS to issue guidance so its personnel comply fully with existing laws about sharing information with state and local governments.
For what purpose?
For law enforcement purposes and for verifying citizenship or immigration status when authorized by law.
Right.
Better info flow. It also directs the AG, HHS Secretary, and DHS Secretary to share necessary info to help stop the trafficking and smuggling of non-citizen children into the U.S.
Okay, coordination and information flow seem to be themes. What about Section 15? Reestablishment of the voice office and addressing victims.
Right. This order directs the IC director to bring back an office within ICE.
The voice office.
Yes, Voice E stands for Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement. Its stated purpose is to provide services to victims of crimes committed by removable individuals and also to their families.
So a dedicated victim support office within ICE.
That's the directive. It also tells the Attorney General to make sure crime victims' rights under federal law are followed in federal prosecutions when the crime involves a removable alien.
Okay, so we've walked through a lot of detailed directives here. When you put it all together, what's the big picture from this deep dive into the order?
Well, it really outlines a very broad range of actions. The clear goal seems to be a significant ramp up in immigration enforcement across the board.
Expanding tools, expanding reach.
Exactly. Expanding tools, involving state and local partners more directly, putting pressure on other countries.
And explicitly reversing policies from the prior administration.
Yes, reversing specific policies, conducting that really thorough funding review for NGOs, and setting up or reestablishing services focused on victims of certain crimes.
What strikes me is the level of detail. It's not just saying increase enforcement. It's directing specific agencies, pointing to specific legal statutes, mandating task forces, reviewing funding streams, focusing on detention.
It's definitely granular in its directives. It seems like an attempt to create a really comprehensive, multi-agency, multi-level approach to immigration enforcement.
And it consistently refers back to existing laws, existing statutes.
Right. It frames itself as relying heavily on existing legal authority, but at the same time, it's directing very specific operational changes, new structures, and policy reversals to push towards its stated goals, protecting safety, security, financial well-being. Which, leads to an interesting thought.
So we've gone through the core directives, the stated objectives, all based purely on the text of this executive order document itself.
It lays out a series of actions clearly aimed at a major shift in how immigration enforcement is conducted, citing those reasons of national security, public safety, and cost.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to chew on, based on what we've discussed from the document.
Okay.
The order keeps emphasizing using all lawful means and faithfully executing existing immigration laws.
Right, that phrase comes up repeatedly.
So when you combine that emphasis on existing law with these directives to undo specific prior policies and create entirely new structures like nationwide task forces, these deep funding reviews, what does that tell us? What does that combination suggest about how executive orders can interact with, or maybe interpret and shape the implementation of, existing law when tackling huge, complex issues like immigration?
That's definitely something to think about, how executive action directs the how of applying laws already on the books.
Something to consider as you process all this information.